Uyghurs mainly live here, in the Xinjiang province of northwestern China. That puts them closer to the capitals of Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan than to Beijing. And Uyghurs are also closer culturally to those Turkic groups than they are to the Han Chinese, China's ethnic majority.
The Uyghurs speak a Turkic language. Their culture is different. They have particular styles of music, a whole rich history that is unique to them.
This is Sigal Samuel, a reporter at Vox.
I've been reporting on the Uyghur crisis in China for about a year now. China has been concerned for decades about the possibility of Uyghur separatism.
Uyghurs have actually had their own independent nation 2 separate times in the last century. In 1933, they established the Islamic Republic of East Turkestan, here in Kashgar. But it crumbled less than a year later when it was taken over by Chinese forces. Then, in 1944, the Soviet Union backed the creation of the East Turkestan Republic, based here. But when China became communist in 1949, the Soviet Union turned on East Turkestan and helped China take it over again. Part of why the Xinjiang region is so important to China is that it's rich with energy resources. And as China's economy grew, so did its need for energy. Today, Xinjiang accounts for nearly 40% of China's coal reserves and over 20% of the country's oil and gas. It also accounts for 20% of China's potential for wind energy.
China needs resources, it needs energy, it needs the geographical location, the area on which Xinjiang sits. That's where Uyghurs are. That's where they're living. And so China really wants to have a solid sense of control over that area.
As far back as the 1950s, China saw an opportunity to dilute the influence of the potentially rebellious Uyghurs and started encouraging the migration of Han Chinese into Xinjiang. And it worked. In 1945, Uyghurs made up over 80% of the population, compared to just 6% Han Chinese. By 2008, Xinjiang was 46% Uyghur compared to 39% Han Chinese. But over the years, as Xinjiang developed economically, Uyghurs were left behind, working mostly low-wage jobs in agriculture, while the Han held higher-paying jobs. Finally, in 2009, a Uyghur protest against discrimination at the hands of the Han and the Chinese government erupted in violence.
Bloody riots broke out, pitting ethnic Uyghur Muslims against the dominant Han Chinese.
One of the worst riots took place in the provincial capital of Urumqi. About 200 people were killed and hundreds injured during the unrest.
That was sort of an inflection point. After that, the Chinese really started to crack down harder on the Uyghurs.
And by 2013, Xinjiang had become even more important to China. The country launched the Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion investment in things like fiber optic cables, train lines, and gas pipelines, meant to boost the country's economic and political influence around the world by making it easier to trade with China. If you plot these projects on a map, you'll see a lot of them pass through Xinjiang, making the province arguably the most important corridor for the whole project. China would need to ensure that Xinjiang remained securely in its hands.
The Uyghurs came to be perceived and painted more as a threat, as a separatist threat, as an extremist threat.
In 2016 and 2017, the country enacted a series of de-extremification policies aimed at Muslims, like banning long beards. And Xinjiang was effectively turned into a high-tech police state.
So this kind of thing is happening all over the country, but in Xinjiang, it's been just increased by orders of magnitude. We're talking about Uyghurs having to hand over their phones at checkpoints. We're even talking about QR codes being installed on the outside of their homes.
But the most brutal part of this crackdown was hidden to the world at first.
In this image, you see the opening of this facility. The signage, it says De-Extremification Re-Education Center.
Around 2017, China started building these internment camps, these large-scale places to detain Uyghurs. China says that these camps are necessary because the Uyghurs are a terrorist threat, a separatist threat, people who are infected with extremist thinking.
But it wasn't until Uyghurs who had been detained told their stories that the picture from inside the camps came into clearer focus.
They're forced to memorize and recite Communist Party propaganda every day. They're often forced to criticize their own Islamic beliefs and to criticize the beliefs of their fellow detainees.
We had to sing songs hailing the Communist Party. We had to repeat in Chinese, "Long live Xi Jinping."
There have been reports of death, of torture.
3 guards surrounded me and abused me.
Each time I was electrocuted, my whole body would shake.
So there's this atmosphere of just trying to uproot what you believe in.
At first, China denied the existence of these camps.
他们安居乐业，享受着宪法所规定的宗教信仰自由，所以呢，根本不存在你刚才提到的一些报道当中说的所谓的新疆维族人的问题。
But activists and academics fought back.
A lot of people around the world are scouring the internet for evidence of China's internment camps for Uyghurs.
In terms of the strategies and tools that I've used, I know others have used to uncover evidence of these camps, it's quite simply a computer and knowledge of Chinese and thinking about what words, especially government websites, would use.
People have unearthed government documents.
And then we had growing visual evidence. We're looking at satellite images. We can actually trace the creation and expansion of the re-education camp. It was a matter of I think luck or chance that I uncovered this image. And until then, we didn't have that piece of visual evidence that said, this is what it is, and this is what the Chinese government is calling it.
Tim isn't alone. There's a whole network of web sleuths around the world using basic internet tools to document what China doesn't want the world to see. And they've gotten China to change their story, at least a little.
China was denying that these re-education centers exist until journalists and academics and others started to really amass a body of evidence that was so convincing that China couldn't just deny it anymore.
China took a different approach and started admitting that these facilities exist, but carefully painted them as training schools for potential criminals or terrorists.
实际上，我们这个中心啊，是一所这个寄宿制的学校。
In the meantime, the camps are still there and growing. This camp, one of China's largest, was as big as the nearby city of Dabancheng in 2017. But by 2018, the camp had expanded to twice the size.
From China's perspective, they think it's worth it. They want to make sure Xinjiang is an area of the country that they have total control over. And if that comes with a high human cost and even a reputational blow on the international stage, China so far seems willing to do that anyway.
Xinjiang makes mountains of cotton, a fifth of the world's total. And our investigation will only heighten concerns about this product, although the evidence wasn't easy to find.
And they're waiting for us.
We're turned back at checkpoints. Stopped from filming, questioned, and followed. This is one site we're trying to get to, a giant re-education camp. But more recently, something else has been built next door, a textile factory. Days after its completion, a large group of people can be seen being moved between the camp and the factory.
Wow, and this is the factory here. It's extraordinary.
From the ground, it's clear the factory and accommodation blocks are all now one single site, plastered with Communist Party slogans. But when we get out to film,
we are entitled to film in public anywhere in China.
China says these places are simply about creating jobs. But everywhere we go,
There's this extraordinary effort to stop us documenting any of it.
in Xinjiang, a whole culture is under suspicion. More than 1 million Uyghurs and other traditionally Muslim minorities are thought to have been swept into the camps, viewed by China as potential Islamist separatists. But each year, more than 2 million others are being gathered for something else. Giant new factories and textile mills, hundreds of them, where they face strict controls and political indoctrination. The first thing our workers have to learn is to love the Communist Party, this factory boss says. But now the BBC has seen evidence that shows Uyghurs are also being sent en masse into the cotton fields.
One day my family will disappear from this world.
Mahmoud, not his real name, left Xinjiang 3 years ago, but his family still lives there.
And my mom told me she's picking the cotton for the government officers. It's like our duty to do that work. They will just go because they are so afraid of being taken to jail or somewhere else.
Newly uncovered documents show the scale. 150,000 pickers sent to one area, almost as many again organised for another. They're given ideological education, and the lazy, the authorities say, are being taught the glories of work. The evidence suggests that the real intention here in Xinjiang is the dismantling of an entire culture, and it's rebuilding through the total control of people's families, their faith, their thoughts, and on a massive scale across the fields and factories of this region in the work that they do. In a written statement, the Chinese government said workers from all ethnic groups in Xinjiang choose their jobs according to free will and sign contracts in accordance with the law. It said accusations of forced labour were completely fabricated. But the researcher who unearthed the documents believes they have major implications for the global fashion industry.
For the first time, we not only have evidence of Uyghur forced labor in manufacturing, in garment making, we have evidence of a massive state-sponsored forced labor scheme involving hundreds of thousands, over 500,000 of ethnic minorities, and it's directly about the picking of cotton in terms of global supply chains. Now that's a game changer.
As we leave Xinjiang, we pass this prison camp complex, thought to contain multiple factory buildings. It's the first independent footage of this truly colossal site, a final chilling reminder that here, mass incarceration and mass labour are closely...
In the 1940s, and since 1949, since it's been under Chinese control, there were various clashes and incidents of terrorism, both in Xinjiang and in other parts of China, either attributed to or claimed by Uyghur extremists. It seems to be that the Chinese authorities see Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities that are in Xinjiang, that they basically see them all as potential separatists or terrorists. So if you go to Xinjiang, it looks like somewhere that is in the middle of a civil war. There are checkpoints everywhere. There's armed police, military.
To be in Xinjiang means being checked every day, multiple times a day. When you go to a market, when you drive a car, when you take a train, even your smartphone is checked.
It is difficult to report there because you will be followed by state security agents that basically intimidate you and intimidate anybody that you try to speak to.
Why can't we ask some questions?
These police stations everywhere and, cameras, so many cameras.
The BBC has seen new, detailed satellite analysis of dozens of suspected camps across Xinjiang.
Wow, look at this. It's like a city.
The Chinese government claims that these camps are vocational training centers and that people are not forced to go to them, that the detainees in them are not detainees but students.
Like most boarding schools, students here take classes, play sports, and do all kinds of extracurricular activities.
And they learn, marketable, employable skills, and they learn Chinese, and they come out, better off.
This is what it wants the world to see.
But we know from accounts from people who have been inside the camps that these camps are de facto prisons and people have to go in them. They don't have a choice. They're separated from their families. And inside, they undergo basically political indoctrination. So that can include having to sit for hours and listen to speeches by Xi Jinping, or singing patriotic songs, or listening to lectures about the party. We also have heard of cases of torture. So people being strapped to something called a tiger chair for hours.
Each time I was electrocuted, my whole body would shake. I begged them to kill me.
There have also been reports of forced medication, forced sterilizations.
Mothers, fathers, siblings and lovers, all that disappeared. They're Uyghurs flung into Chinese camps. Their relatives say it's ethnic cleansing.
This is a crime against humanity, crime against the Uyghur people.
The US Commission on International Religious Freedom believing it might meet the legal criteria for genocide.
So sorry to interrupt, but according to your own local government statistics, the population growth in Uyghur jurisdictions in that area has fallen by 84% between 2015 and 2018. 84%.
That's not right. I said,
Well,
I gave you an official figure. You ask me, I give you this figure as a Chinese ambassador.
You know, people have recently been talking about whether or not we can finally say that this is genocide. And what human rights investigators say is that this is not a genocide in terms of, you know, in one go or in a condensed period of time, people being exterminated, but it's a slow process of erasing an identity and a culture and a population, because we've seen things like forced sterilizations and IUDs being put into women and intermarriage being very much encouraged. It seems that there is some effort to reduce the population. And so some people would say that now
Çıkasam buldu. Sonkang apırışqa yordam kerakmi? Achki talamsatdi, men achki talayman dedi. Kızın çaçamlayısı bir qumluqning o'ttirisiga joylashgan mayda bir kichkina bir yurt. Lekin xalqlari shunchalik tabiiy, sodda, shundoq mehmondo'st, bir-birimizga yordam qiladigan, haqiqiy Uyg'ur tupini saqlab qolgan bir go'zal bir hamma narsa tabiiy holatdagi bir yurt edi. Çünkü ben 3 kızak doğdum. 3 o'g'il bir qiz. Shu 3 balani beqishni men bek tez ko'rdim, çünkü oson emas bir onaga 3 balani beqib qo'ymoq. O'zim kichik bo'lgandan keyin u hech bir tuxum yo'q u yerda. Yo'ldoshim bo'lsa ishlaydi. Shuning bilan opam dadam bo'lgandan keyin opam dadam bekor bo'lgandan keyin shular beqib yurdi. Cho'mganda shularga yordamlab balanim ancha-muncha cho'ng qilib, akiliman go deganni o'ylab kirib shu pasportdan o'tib, so'mkalarni olmagan vaqt, shu pasportni tekshirish kirgan vaqtlar shu yerdan pasportim bilan meni mayoq uyga kirdi, pasportga kirib shu yerda so'rab bir narsani qilib, shu palni biz tutib turmiz, mana boshqa soqchilarni o'qib turdi. Qadamni tugaydi deb chiqdi. Hamiyat shu 3-4 soat shu so'roq qilib bo'lgandan keyin ondaga shu yerdan beshimga xalta kiygizib, qo'limga ko'yizga kiygizib, boshqa bir eshikdan epmanim qanaq qildi. Biletem nasamni shu shular olib qoldi. Ashna chiqib ketib shu Urumchidagi hijazam turmoq usullar. Qo'yib bergan kuni doktorxonaga bordim. Aytsa shu balam tugab ketdi. Doktorxonadagi balamni ko'rmadsam kirgizmadi, sirtdan kirgizdi. O balam shu hech bir nafaslanishim ko'ngilmaydi qishga bormagandan keyin aynakdan ko'rdim. Aytsa shu chaqirib qutqilish unimamdi deb shu bir narsani qildi, kallangizga tumir bir narsa kayg'izdi. Bu yerda atrofda sirlar chetildi. Men o'ldir deganda deb o'ylayotganmiz. Shu bir qanikilar mash baştaraf tizilib ketgan. Adam o'tdi badan tuyuqsiz holatda ham o'chu Onda kendisi ölüp qalsa buldu ekan, adamning tumur o'tdi ekanda, so'ngkilar bir xil bo'lib ketgan ekan. Tasaklar bilan urdi. Shu qulog'im hozir qadar og'rimaydi, og'rimas bo'lib qopti, quloq parchasi yetilib ketibdi dedi. Katta dedi, berib shu xabar bo'lmabdi. Keyin arliqda yana boshqa Uyg'urlar borgan bo'libdi. Kelganlarni anglab nima qilsa, u ne shu tutib olgan, Beijing aeroportida tutib olibdi. Ondan keyin yana boshqa birisini nima qilsa, tinglab beqishchamdi. Chunki ularningki vatanda xil bir tunishtirib bor, ishkillar turadigan Uyg'urlar tijorat qilganlar bor. Shuni anglashchamdi. 16 yil uyga isibdi. Şu xo'sh turmushga yo'llabdi, lekin xo'sh turmushga telefon qilib, undan kech bir shaharlikini bildik. Dedi, lekin hozir ko'rishtirmaymiz, oilasi bo'lsam, pul silib bir narsa qilolmaysa, 6 oy o'tmaguncha deb boshladi dedi. Kuch bu ilhom mening birinchidan e'tiqodim, ikkinchidan ümidim hem şu vatanda qolgan şu bichara zulm uchirganlarninki ümidi, arzusi, erkinlik, hürlik arzusi, ümidi. Şu meni bu şeyga chiqib so'zlashga kuchlantirdi. Men shularning ovozi, meni saqlab turolmasligimdagi sabab men bu yerda kunda nurg'un odam o'lyotdi. Men bir kamerada 3 oyda 9 ayol o'lgan bo'lsam, boshqa 200 necha kamerada qanday bo'ldi? Boshqa yurtlarda qancha odam o'lib ketdi? Shuni men saqlayolmadim. Bir kun saqlasam, aşağıda qiynalgan o'ldiganlar bir kun ko'payib ketadi ekan. Deb shu o'ldirdi meni. Oxirida opamdan ko'rib qolsam, shuni menda kechirim so'rayman ulardan. Opamdan, dadamdan, o'zgalardan kechirim so'rayman. Ular hech kim qilib bermadim.